Welcome back to my tendency typing series. If you haven't watched my class on Riley Keough, I highly recommend checking it out first. I go over tendencies and missions in some detail there, which I won't be repeating in this video. So if you're still a little unsure about what's what, that's the place to start. I chose Melinda Gates for today's typing session because her commencement speech is going to make for a nice contrast to last week's class. Both Melinda and Riley are Explorer Last, both are NI and TE saviors, so already they have a lot in common and should sound similar. Melinda is Respond, where Riley is Hone, and Melinda is a Social Type 3, where Riley's a number 4, but both have Hone and Respond in the middle, balanced, and so I think they still make for a good pair to compare. Riley's an attender/observer, but last time we saw that despite that fact, Riley was talking a lot about very judgy things because, as it turns out, she's imbalanced on the tendency axis judgment. Will Melinda, who's an actual intender/decider, sound as judgy as her? What will her advice to the young graduates of Stanford be? But before we jump into the typing, let's go over Melinda's skills and deduce her first tendency and then narrow down the missions to the possible 2 she could have. Melinda is Guide, Respond, Hone, and Explore Last, and that makes her first tendency automatically collaborative. So this is already different from Riley, who last time we typed as selective. Because Melinda's collaborative first, her mission can only be one of 2. Serve or unite. Serve would put her on the pragmatic axis, unite would make her fundamental.
That is an amazing accomplishment.
The word accomplishment makes me think of various things. Initially, I had this as a choice word, and that's because a lot on the choice axis is about being able to do something, and accomplished does go a little in that direction. Now, it also makes me think whether it belongs to the pragmatic axis, as words like success seem to be leaning that way.
And while he worked on his master's degree, my mother, Elaine French, supported them with her job at a bottled water company. And on nights and weekends, she was my dad's lab assistant.
The mother being a support and an assistant makes me think of servers. These are not keywords I have definitely assigned to that mission though.
Back on campus for a very special occasion, to watch their granddaughter Phoebe graduate from the university that changed my dad's life.
The word changed, and especially in relation to someone's life, goes in the direction of choice.
Not the only one to follow in his footsteps. My older daughter Jen and my son-in-law Niall earned degrees here too.
To follow in someone's footsteps means taking the same path, another choice keyword.
And Mom, thanks for making this story possible.
First, possible is a choice word. People imbalanced on the choice axis often worry about whether something's possible or they're capable. There's a lot of talk about limits and obstacles. And then it also makes me think of a server again, the mom who supported others.
And is proud to be here as my family and I are.
Proud is a judgment word. I don't think it means much in this context where probably everyone would say it, but we save it away because we're not biased in this classroom.
Graduates, you have given us a lot to celebrate and also a lot to admire.
Admire, another judgment word.
You arrived on this campus already accomplished and ambitious young people.
Accomplished, again, used to be on the choice axis and, like I said before, is tied to success in some ways which may or may not be on the pragmatic axis.
And during your time here, you've also proven how adaptable you are.
Adaptable is a curious choice word. Is this something to strive for, or is this something natural? That would tell us whether she's receptive or protective.
And what powerful advocates you are for the causes you believe in.
Advocates I could see on either the pragmatic or the fundamental axes. It does sound a little like it's simply going in the collaborative tendency. Powerful I've heard associated with either guidance or relevance in particular. So currently I'm tracking it to see whether it clusters in the choice axes. It would make sense given that earlier we were talking about the fact that choice is all about being able to do something, limits, obstacles, etc. And having the power to do something might be the opposite of being limited. Believe is a choice word, and that's because what's also in the choice axis is everything to do with information. Is this true or not? Is this real? Is it made up? So stories as well, clarity, and beliefs that are or are not based on reality and fact. But beliefs also tie into motivation and passion. While those sound like judgment words, I currently have them on the choice axis as well. Why is that? Because passion, motivation, and determination direct our path in life and the choices we make as a result.
Stanford is a demanding university, and your time here was made even more challenging by what was happening in the world all around you.
Challenging is a choice word, again, tied to the idea of limits and obstacles and overcoming them. Happening is also a choice word, albeit super weak, and so is the word time. I would never save them away on their own, but since they're part of the sentence, they do make it clear that this is leaning towards choice quite strongly.
From a once-in-a-century pandemic that changed the way you lived and learned.
Again, there's a reference here to time, and then the word change, which isn't always a strong choice word, but in this context of the way we live and learn, I think it is. The way usually makes me think of relevance, and so this might be a hint towards her being protective rather than receptive.
There is no question you are graduating into a different world than the one you matriculated into.
Different, I don't tend to save often as choice, but I think in the context of a different world, it's actually quite strong.
But you are also leaving this campus prepared to be the leaders that we all need.
Prepared is another choice word. It fits into the category of readiness. I'm quite on the fence about the word leaders. I have heard it from a bunch of people who I suspect to be on the pragmatic axis, those being Brene Brown and Simon Sinek. But since I can't really explain why this would be leaning more towards pragmatism rather than fundamentalism, I keep a very strict eye on it. Maybe it does belong in pragmatism because it's more about individual responsibility and individual skills as leaders rather than being about humanity as a group, even if leaders do lead movements, I guess. I don't know. I have to be honest, at this point, I'm not only having a strong bias towards her being choice, or single choice rather, but it's very hard not to make up one's mind about her being a server, and thus protective as well. This would line up very neatly with her being explored last, and sometimes when tendencies don't contradict the skills, they're more easily discernible. And that seems to be the case with Melinda if we compare it to just how tricky Riley was to type last time.
And today marks an important milestone in that journey.
Milestones is a super strong choice word. Important quite often too, although that's a tricky one that can be used in different ways. Okay, but why would important ever be choice and not judgment if we associate the word with feeling? First of all, I don't think important is a feeling word at all. Rather, it goes in the direction of relevance. The thing that is important helps us get rid of distractions that aren't important. It marks the path, closes down extraneous options, and makes the right choice more clear. It's often used in the context of lessons too, that learning that we attracted from the mess that happened to us. My speculation is that because Dave is both relevance, that is NI, but then also FI, they confused one with the other. They thought prioritizing comes from feeling when it actually comes from relevance.
You will hear that call as a Stanford student.
I don't know what I think about the call. It sounds like a mission word, but I wouldn't know what mission it belongs to. It also makes me think again of narrowing down options by having that calling or that passion or that path laid out. So it could be choice, probably protective and not receptive, and therefore possibly pointing towards her being a server again.
You will answer that call as a Stanford graduate.
More call, and then the word answer. Now, questions and answers are a category on the choice axis. That's because, again, we're trying to find out what the truth is and the correct information. It's not used that way here, but why not save it anyway for future comparison?
And with that, a major transition in your life will begin.
Transition akin to change, very strong choice word. We get it twice here.
I've been thinking a lot lately about transitions. The spiritual leader Ram Dass had a wonderful teaching about two waves traveling through the ocean, one big and one small. And as the waves get closer to the land, the big wave sees what's about to happen. They see all the waves ahead of them are just crashing onto the shore.
This part of the wave story is about seeing or anticipating the future, which is another choice keyword.
The end is near. And the small wave just smiles and says, "Don't worry, we'll be fine." You don't understand, the big wave insists, we're done for.
Here, the choice keyword is worry. This again has to do with the future and also possibilities, in this case, negative ones. Worry I typically associate with protective rather than receptive, although there are exceptions, so beware of that.
You don't understand, the big wave insists, we're done for. And the smaller wave is just totally calm and says, "No, we're not. And I can explain why in just 6 words. You're not a wave, you're water."
Now, with the end of that whole wave story, we get that this is about adaptability again. This seems to be something she admires, but then does it come naturally to her, or is it a discovery? There are a couple of other interesting choice words in this. One is understand, which again comes back to making sense of the world. Then calm, which is the opposite of worry. Possibly explain and why too, but we're not desperate here, so let's leave it at that.
It captures what it's like to experience an enormous transition without losing the core of who you are.
Again, the word transition, but she also says without losing the core of who you are, which sounds like identity, a judgment word. I think at this point it's pretty clear that Melinda's not imbalanced on the judgment axis, but since we know she's collaborative above selective, this could mean that collaborative people are more worried about losing their identity. The other thing that comes to mind is that identity is made up of two parts. And one part is the lessons you've learned and the things you think are relevant. And that's the attender/observer part of identity. This seems to be more at stake here in this takeaway, so even though it's about identity, I don't think it's pointing towards judgment for me.
I turned 60 this year, and you don't get to be my age without navigating all kinds of transitions.
More transitions, but also the word navigate, which is a very choicey word related to paths and futures and even obstacles.
Some you embraced, and some you never expected. Some you hoped for, and some you fought as hard as you could.
I saved this one because there's something to the words embrace and fought that makes me think of receptive demon. I'm also curious about whether the word hope will end up clustering anywhere.
And very recently, making a major career shift.
Career shift is more choice.
In each case, there was a moment that I felt like that big wave, terrified that life as I knew it was about to be over.
Moment is a word I usually only save if there's something pivotal or insightful connected to it, but then it belongs to choice. Terrified and fear also generally belong to choice. There are times when it's more fear of judgment or other people, but here she talks about her life being over, so clearly choice.
But I always made it to the next day, and so will you. And I've learned that the next day is when the real work begins.
Learning I associate more with protective saviors than with receptive ones, usually because that's the narrowed down takeaway and lesson. Also, the real work somehow makes me think of servers. This is more of a hunch though.
Because what we do the next day is what makes us who we are.
I don't know where this belongs. It sounds significant, but I have no clue. Maybe it's just being collaborative, over selective, or something to do with being guide savior.
3 lessons I've learned from my own experience with transitions.
Lessons makes me think of protective again, but own experience also sounds to me more individualistic. This isn't always the best measuring stick to decide between the fundamental or the pragmatic mission axes, but at this point I'm very convinced that she is receptive last, and that would make her a server. I'm saving things in anticipation of learning something new about servers. And yes, I use the word learning deliberately because this might eventually make new categories in the missions section.
The first piece of advice is to enter these moments with radical open-heartedness.
Open-heartedness again makes me think she's receptive demon. This is tricky though, because even people who are savior receptive can say these things because they never learned better. But in any case, this is choice again.
Most of the time, we walk around through life in the thicket of our everyday routine.
Everyday routine may be choice, but mostly a see explore last in this.
But during a transition, we step out of our familiar surroundings into a big, wide open space where everything is new.
Stepping out of familiar surroundings again sounds very much like familiar is the norm and the big open wide space is the thing she learned to appreciate.
Or you can find the courage to linger in that liminal space and see what it has to tell you.
I love the word liminal space here as it evokes quite strong images. I think what she means is that this is the space where unknown possibilities exist, and that of course points even more to choice. And because of the word courage, which is actually a judgment word, it makes it clear that this is protectiveness as well.
I had a list of goals I wanted to accomplish, and as soon as I checked one off the list, I raced across the clearing to the next one. Because frankly, it was a lot less scary that way.
Scary is another choice word, especially in this context. Checking things off a list I've heard from other guide saviors, but it may also point towards cleaning up, meaning more protectiveness.
But as I've gotten older, I've learned the value of embracing uncertainty.
With this one, aside from the usual choice and explore last, I just want to point out that I would have expected this to come from an IJ like Riley, not an EJ like Melinda. And this is why I wanted to put their classes back to back so you can see the contrast starkly.
When I entered philanthropy more than 25 years ago, it was completely unfamiliar terrain. I didn't have any experience in global health or development yet.
Not having experience sounds again to me more like someone with protectiveness. It could be the social type too, or a doubling up, but this is definitely not someone that is usually winging it. And that despite her being a response savior.
And I knew I'd need to pay attention.
I'm saving this one because I like the word attention here. The word and how it is used in the context is why I decided to switch out the word observing or even perceiving, the original Carl Jung term, with attention or attending. Both observing and perceiving are words that are very passive, but relevance or OI is anything but passive. It's for building, for externalizing. But where is your attention? Is it outward, on the possibilities, or focused on the relevant task at hand? Captures what attending or observing is about in both directions.
But when I started traveling around the world to see the work in action, the women I met kept changing the subject.
The reason I've saved this one is because this is pragmatism at its finest. She goes out with a solution, but then encounters a problem and has to pivot. It's also a testament to how guide works, but the hands-on approach and the easy, oh, this doesn't work, let's do something different, is exemplary for the pragmatic approach. Having said that, uniters can look like they're also pivoting all the time. Take Trump, who I believe to be a uniter, and who creates more chaos than even a disruptor could stomach, but his chaos isn't centered around solving one specific problem. His fundamental message is to make America great again, but that's a unifying slogan, not a pragmatic down-to-earth solution to current problems. It gets trickier with people who do firefighting, that is moment-to-moment problem solving. They can often be uniters that are reacting to what's happening rather than trying to solve specific systemic problems, which is what disrupting or even serving is about. Melinda here went in with a specific solution, the vaccines, to the specific problem of disease prevention. Still, I get that it's a fine line to be able to easily distinguish, and so hopefully in the future we'll get more examples that make this clearer.
So I stopped and I listened to what they had to say.
Stopping is another choice word, as is starting, waiting, and readiness in general. I also wonder about the word listened. It could simply signify the pivot she's about to make. It could have to do with her being explore last. I did hear this word a lot from Yuval Harari, and it could have something to do with single choice, that is taking in new information. Harari too is single choice.
Those conversations led to others. I learned how much society benefits when women are able to make their own decisions, control their own resources, and direct their own futures.
Usually conversations is more on the fundamental side to get everyone on board with a unifying idea. I could be wrong about it though, and it might just simply be collaborative. Decision, control, resources, and future are all choice words. I'm a little puzzled by her emphasis on own, but maybe that is simply to do with being collaborative again. Permission is a judgment word, usually used by collaborative people.
And I began to focus my efforts there instead.
Focusing her efforts here sounds like a pivot, as if she had identified the real problem instead of the one she set out to solve. This isn't super clearly pragmatic, but I think at this point we can safely say that she is a server, and so maybe we can work backwards, trying to understand what it is that servers care about from this statement.
I think back now to those early trips with such gratitude because the women I met took me in a new direction, and they led me to my life's work.
Direction is another choice word, but I also like the phrasing of the women leading her to her life's work. This is saying that her finding her life's work was determined from people on the outside. Melinda was being guided to her mission by others. If we think of Flex being self-driven and Melinda being a number 3, this can come from the social sense. But this could be how the mission server works. Servers are made aware of what the problem is by others and then find their mission in fixing that problem.
Now you are Stanford students, so I imagine most of you are graduating today with big plans for yourselves. Higher degrees to earn, causes to advance, companies to start, industries to disrupt.
I love that she says industry to disrupt here. Not that people on the fundamental axes can't say the word disrupt. I actually have no data on this so far, but I could see this being one of the words that gets said on the pragmatic axis more.
But my advice is to leave some room for those plans to change. Resist the idea that anything you've done here at Stanford has already locked you into one path or any one kind of career.
Again, more advice to leave rooms for plans to change. I think at this point we don't need to say more about how this is both single choice as well as receptive last. Resist is a word that is more interesting as it falls into the choice category of boundaries and saying no, even though here it is used as its opposite. Locked and path are more very strong choice words.
Be excited about the fact that you will encounter possibilities you haven't even imagined. And be willing to let what you learn shift your thinking about what you're here on this earth to do.
Possibilities is of course more single choice. I don't know about shift your thinking. I wonder if it has anything to do with pragmatism. I definitely hear from disruptors that you should think independently. It might again be something that resides on the pragmatic axis.
Remember that once the wave learns to call itself by a different name, once it realizes it's not just a wave, but it is water, it becomes free to take on new forms.
The word free throws me for a loop a little here, as in the last class I attributed it to the fundamental axes. I will have to keep an eye on it. So without any surprises at this point, I think we can put Melinda's tendency order as collaborative, protective, selective, and then receptive last, making her a server. These examples should have made a really nice contrast to Riley, who we typed as a cocooner. Both are protective, but one's on the pragmatic axis and one's on the fundamental mission axis. And the way that both women talk differently hopefully gave you a better understanding of what differentiates these two axes. And also, of course, how different choice imbalance sounds compared to judgment imbalance. Melinda, being collaborative and protective, is a very pure explore last oblivious shepherd, in contrast again to Riley. But the most interesting thing about her is just how much she talks about the choice axis concerns. Very attendery or observery things, except that she's an intender / decider. And maybe before you might have put that simply in the explore last bucket, but with Riley as a contrasting example, you can now see that this can be better explained with the tendencies. There's still the concern of whether the social type played a role here in making one sound more like an intender / decider and the other more like an attender / observer, even though their actual functions had them the other way around. So for the next video, we will type someone whose tendency imbalance contradicts their social type, just so that we can rule that out as the reason for their different concerns. There were a few examples showing the difference between the pragmatic and the fundamental axes. Unfortunately, not enough to really drive home the difference between the two. Hopefully by and by, I can give you a better sense of what really differentiates them. I want to briefly talk about the words choice and decision. This isn't 100% backed by data yet. We'll have to type people in the tendencies first and then recalibrate all of our words to see whether this lines up. But we do have the data confirming that the word decision does not cluster in people who are intenders / deciders. To me, the words decision and choice have always been more on the attender / observer axes because they're about narrowing down options. I honestly don't understand why Dave and Shan put this into the intender / decider axes. Maybe because Shan is receptive first, and that's usually the tendency that makes it harder to narrow down choices and make decisions, and so that maybe made them think it was an intender / decider word. But in any case, this is yet another reason I'm not keeping the original labels. If you're interested how I came up with the words attender and intender, there's a book about the brain hemispheres by Ian McGilchrist called The Master and His Emissary that talks about how the left and right hemispheres determine where our attention and intention lies. And the way that he describes both lines up very neatly with observing and deciding. I initially thought about going back to Carl Jung's perceiving and judging, but we already had the P in play at the time, and I honestly think that perceiving sounds way too passive to be able to explain introverted attending or observing. But I don't want to get too much into the weeds here. I will probably make a separate video at some point explaining all my renamed choices. And that's it for today. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next class.